The Whitmore estate did not feel like a home. It felt like a statement, stone, glass, and silence arranged to remind everyone inside who mattered. Every surface was polished. Every hallway swallowed sound. Even the air felt controlled, as if discomfort itself had been filtered out. At dawn, a house woke automatically. Lights warmed. Security monitors refreshed. Outside, the fountain turned on at the exact same minute every morning, spraying water with mechanical certainty. Ruth Johnson was already awake. She moved through the kitchen with practiced discipline, her uniform crisp, her motions economical. Ruth did not rush, but she never wasted effort. She corrected a vase placed too close to the counter's edge, not for beauty, but for safety. In houses like this, small mistakes became large accusations. She had worked here 6 years, long enough to become invisible, present enough to keep everything running, invisible enough to receive no credit. At 6:30 a.m., she carried a breakfast tray down the hallway, passing the oversized portrait of Harrison Whitmore, the billionaire patriarch smiling beside a skyline he owned. Power lived in this house like furniture, permanent, unquestioned. Footsteps descended the stairs. Lucas Whitmore appeared, phone at his ear, laughing. 26. Handsome in the careless way only privilege allowed. He moved like space belonged to him. He noticed Ruth only after passing her. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early, Mr. Whitmore." He smiled. "You can call me Lucas."
"Yes, sir."
He glanced at the tray. "Father's awake already?" "Yes, sir." "Since 5. Lucas scoffed. Then casually, "I need a favor." Ruth tightened her grip slightly. "What kind of favor?" "A private delivery later today. No security." "Just bring it upstairs?" "That isn't procedure. Security reports to my father," Lucas said smoothly. "And I don't want questions." Ruth met his eyes. "This house works because people follow rules." He laughed. "That's why I trust you." The word felt wrong, like ownership. By noon, the courier arrived, a man with a small black case and no smile. "Lucas Whitmore," he said. "He said you'd handle it." Ruth hesitated. Refusal meant trouble. Compliance meant risk. She took the case. "Make sure no one else touches it," the courier warned. "Then why give it to me?" she asked. He didn't answer. Lucas took the case upstairs without opening it. Then his tone shifted. "If anyone asks," he said, "you didn't see the courier. You log it as security approved. That's a lie. It's protection." Lucas corrected. "That's loyalty." The threat followed softly. Uncooperative staff didn't last. Then he placed a black access card on the desk. "My father's office," he said. "Tonight, one document swap." Ruth stared at the card. "Refuse, and she would be labeled a problem. Comply, and she would carry the crime alone." Lucas slid the card closer. "Do this," he said calmly, "and you'll never have to worry about your position again." Then, almost casually, he added, "And if anything goes wrong, my father will believe his son before he ever believes you." Ruth did not take the access card. Not yet. Her hand hovered above it, steady and controlled, while something inside her tightened. The familiar warning that came when powerful people tried to make their consequences her responsibility. Lucas watched with relaxed patience. In his world, resistance was never permanent. People pushed back only until obedience became cheaper. "Don't make this bigger than it is," Lucas said gently. "It's just a correction for you." Ruth replied, "For the family," he said smoothly. "For the house." Ruth met his eyes. "And if your father asks how it happened," she said, "you've already told me what he'll believe." Lucas shrugged. "That's how it works here. It's not personal. It never was. Not for people like him." He stepped back, leaving the card on the desk like a command disguised as a choice. Ruth turned and walked away, carrying her silence like armor. As she moved through the estate, she felt the system watching her: cameras, whispers, logs. This wasn't a home. It was a machine designed to protect one family's image, and she had just been invited to become one of its hidden gears. Lucas had been raised by that machine. Consequences existed for other people. When he broke things, they were fixed. When he failed, the word failure was simply removed. Cars crashed, scandals vanished, money lost by strangers was settled quietly. Protection had taught him carelessness, not cruelty, but the damage was the same. By late afternoon, Ruth returned to her duties, preparing the house for Harrison Whitmore's evening compliance meeting. The mansion ran on invisible labor, and Ruth could hear where its rhythm faltered. A junior staff member approached her carefully. "Mr. Lucas asked if you'd come upstairs again." Ruth already knew why. Lucas stood by the window when she entered, music playing softly. The access card still lay on the desk. "I need an answer," he said. "Tonight? Why can't you do it yourself?" Ruth asked. "My father tracks my movements," Lucas replied. "If I enter his office after hours, it raises questions. And if I do," Ruth said, "it raises questions about me." He shrugged. "Your staff. You blend in." The truth of it landed hard. She wasn't being insulted. She was being used. "What file?" she asked. "A compliance record," Lucas said. Something flagged. Flagged for what? He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "If my father sees it, he'll cut me off." That was his fear. Not prison, not accountability. Loss of comfort. "And what happens to me if I'm seen?" Ruth asked. "Nothing," he said lightly. "You're careful. You always are." She studied him. "You want me to take the fall for something you won't explain. You're exaggerating." He snapped, then softened. "You don't get it. My father will destroy me." "Careless is a broken glass," Ruth said. "This isn't that." Silence settled between them. Lucas picked up the card and held it out. "Take it," he said. "Just in case." His phone buzzed. He answered, turning slightly away. "Yeah, I'm handling it. She's loyal." The word made Ruth's stomach drop. After the call, Lucas slid the card toward her again. "This is the only way." Ruth understood then. He hadn't asked for loyalty. He had already used it. She picked up the card. Relief spread across Lucas's face. "Tonight, after 10, Foundation access file. Top drawer." As she turned to leave, he added casually, "Oh, and I already told my father's assistant you handled the delivery log. Make sure the record matches." Ruth stepped into the hallway, holding the access card like a loaded weapon. Realizing her name had already been written into a story she hadn't agreed to tell. And by nightfall, her innocence might no longer be something the house was willing to believe. Ruth carried the access card through the house as if it were fragile glass. Not because it could break, but because it could cut. The plastic weighed almost nothing, yet it sat in her pocket like a warning. Every time her fingers brushed it through the fabric, the alarm in her chest sharpened. She kept working. She always kept working. Routine was a disguise in houses like this. It made danger look normal. It made exploitation look like responsibility. Ruth moved through the afternoon with her usual discipline, checking staff schedules, confirming table settings for Harrison's compliance meeting, making sure the estate looked effortless. The house did not reward effort. It expected it. And Ruth had learned to survive by giving it what it demanded, even when the demand was unfair. But Lucas's order followed her like a shadow. By early evening, Lucas began to orbit her openly. He appeared near the staff corridor, a phone in hand, smiling as if they shared a private joke. "Everything good?" he asked. "The house is prepared," Ruth replied without slowing. "I'm not asking about the house," Lucas said, falling into step beside her. "I'm asking about you." "I'm fine, sir." "You always say that," he said, amused. "One of the things I like. You don't make things complicated." Ruth glanced at him, calm but clear. "Some things are complicated whether I speak or not." Lucas heard only what he wanted, that she was still manageable. A few minutes later, he stepped aside to take a call. Ruth watched from the corridor as his posture tightened, voice dropping into negotiation. "Yeah, it's in motion. No security won't see it. I've got someone handling it." Someone handling it. Ruth's stomach tightened. A phrase that meant she was no longer a person in the story, only a function. As the sun fell, Harrison's compliance meeting began upstairs. Staff were instructed to remain invisible. Doors shut. The hallway outside Harrison's office became a boundary line. You did not cross it unless summoned. Ruth was not summoned. That alone made her skin prickle. At 9:40 p.m., Lucas appeared again near the private elevator. hands in his pockets, voice low, eyes alert. 10 minutes. Ruth looked toward the quiet upper hall. Your father is upstairs. He'll be occupied, Lucas said. Security rotates cameras at 10. You'll have a window. The details were too precise, too rehearsed. You mapped this out, Ruth said. Lucas smiled. I handle things. You handle things? Ruth repeated. And other people pay. His expression flickered, then softened into charm. You're not paying, you're helping. Only for you, Ruth said. Lucas leaned closer, voice almost kind. If they find that record, they'll pull everything apart. Staff. To everyone? So the staff becomes your shield. Ruth replied. Stop turning it into something moral. Lucas snapped. It is moral, Ruth said quietly. Because you chose someone who can't afford your mistakes. He nodded toward the elevator. Time? Ruth stepped inside alone as Lucas pressed the office-level button. When the doors began to close, he offered a final sentence, soft and final. Remember, you're the only one I trust. The elevator rose. The upper corridor opened into silence and expensive polish. Ruth reached the security panel, pulled the card out, and hesitated at the invisible line, then swiped. A green light blinked. The door unlocked. Inside, she moved to the desk, opened the top drawer, and found the faux labeled Phone d'Étienne, a CCS. A second folder sat beneath it, newer, thinner, cleaner, not a correction. An erasure. Then her eyes caught a form on the desk. I enter el delivar y laugi adj justament. Beneath the signature line was a typed name, Radiate Son. Her pulse spiked. A trap already set. A blue light flickered on the security panel outside. Another badge scanned. The door opened. Not Harrison. A compliance consultant stepped in, eyes sharpening as they landed on Ruth, the open drawer, and the form with her name. What are you doing in here? He demanded. Ruth tried to breathe. I was instructed to. He lifted the form like evidence, gaze narrowing as he read the bottom line. Ruth's blood ran cold. Authorized by Lucas Whitmore. Ruth did not sleep. She sat at the small desk in her room, with the blank statement paper still untouched, the pen resting where she had left it. The estate outside her window glowed with controlled elegance, lights trimmed to perfection, security moving on schedules that never accounted for people like her. From a distance, the house looked calm, but Ruth had lived long enough to know calm was often just surface tension before something sank. She closed her eyes and memory came anyway. Ruth had learned loyalty long before she learned choice. She was 13 when her mother lost her job at a manufacturing plant that shut down without warning. One week there was routine. The next week there were eviction notices and polite apologies. Ruth learned early that systems didn't announce abandonment. They simply stopped answering. Her mother took whatever work she could find, cleaning offices at night, sorting laundry for families who never asked her name. Ruth went with her sometimes, sitting quiet in corners, learning the first rule, do not draw attention. Attention invited inspection. Inspection invited judgment. Judgment rarely favored the people who needed mercy. By 16, Ruth worked beside her mother in houses where her presence was tolerated but never acknowledged. She watched women drift through rooms wearing comfort like perfume, complaining about dust while ignoring the hands that wiped it away. Ruth learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to be useful without being demanding. Loyalty was not a virtue then. It was currency. If you were loyal, if you stayed employed. If you stayed employed, you stayed housed. Ruth understood the math and never forgot it. When her mother died unexpectedly, Ruth was 21 and already exhausted from carrying responsibility that should have belonged to adults. There was no safety net, just unpaid bills and a quiet apartment that felt too large. She took the job at the Whitmore estate because it was stable, because stability was the only luxury she could afford. From the first day, Ruth understood the Whitmore rules: order, discretion, and staff who did not bring themselves fully into rooms meant for power. Ruth fit. Over time, she became dependable, trusted. Invisible loyalty to her was not submission. It was strategy. In the present, she stared at the paper again. The accusation forming around her felt familiar. When something went wrong, blame flowed toward the people with the least protection. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You don't know your mother. Ruth typed carefully. Who is this? Elaine Parker. I worked housekeeping for the Whitmores before you. Ruth remembered the name, someone who left suddenly and was replaced by silence. Why contact me now? Because I see what they're doing to you. And because your loyalty reminds me of someone I loved and lost. Ruth swallowed. Elaine had once warned her, don't let them mistake your quiet for consent. What do you want? I want you to understand staying quiet isn't protecting you anymore. It's protecting them. Ruth typed, I don't know how to fight people like this. Elaine replied fast. You already are. But dignity alone won't stop a story once it's moving. Elsewhere, Lucas Whitmore slept soundly. By morning, he felt relief disguised as normalcy. A text from his father steadied him. We'll discuss later. For now, this is contained. Contained settled his nerves. An email from the consultant followed preliminary review complete. No immediate action required. Lucas smiled. He hadn't paid a price. Someone else had absorbed the discomfort. Ruth, meanwhile, moved through the house like a shadow everyone suddenly noticed. Her access was limited. Staff avoided her. Security lingered. Lucas avoided her eyes entirely, which hurt more than confrontation. By mid-afternoon, Ruth received a notice demanding her statement by day's end. She sat again, pen in hand, and began to write. No drama, no pleading. Only facts, what she was told, what she did, what she was never shown. She chose words to protect herself from being twisted. When she finished, she signed her name without apology. Ruth Johnson. As she sealed the envelope, Elaine messaged again, they think this is over. He thinks this is over. Ruth typed, is it? Elaine answered no. Loyalty like yours leaves records. And some people are starting to talk. Ruth walked past Harrison Whitmore's portrait that evening, statement in hand, and didn't look up. Loyalty had kept her alive. Now it was changing. It was no longer just endurance. It was evidence. Cliffhanger. As Ruth placed her signed statement on the compliance desk, Lucas received confirmation that a major opportunity had been approved, while elsewhere in the estate's archives, a forgotten internal report bearing Ruth's name resurfaced, waiting to undo everything he believed he had escaped. The resolution arrived quietly, the way privilege preferred it. No announcements. No apologies. Just an email stamped Purell Aminar EVDU on PLEE, circulated to the right inboxes and withheld from the rest. The language was careful and hollow. It did not say innocent. It did not say guilty. It said no immediate action required, which in the Whitmore world meant one thing: move on. Lucas moved on immediately. He woke the next morning with the confidence of someone whose fear had been briefly inconvenienced, not transformed. The whispers had faded. His father's schedule returned to normal. The house resumed its rhythm. At breakfast, Lucas scrolled through his phone, smiling at messages congratulating him on upcoming approvals and new opportunities. A friend joked about almost getting audited. And Lucas laughed as if the entire incident had been nothing more than background noise. Harrison Whitmore passed through the room, jacket draped perfectly over his arm. He paused, studying his son with measured relief. Be more careful, he said. I will, Lucas replied. That was the reckoning. No lecture, no consequence. Just a reminder to be less visible next time. Ruth watched from the margins. She noticed how Lucas's shoulders relaxed, how his voice regained its ease, how the machine recalibrated to continue serving him. She noticed, too, what had not changed for her. Her access badge still failed at certain doors. Security still lingered near her path. Conversation still paused when she entered rooms. The story about her had not been closed, only shelved. Ruth understood the difference. Privilege didn't need closure. Suspicion did. She moved through her days with the same discipline as always, but something inside her had shifted. She listened more closely to what wasn't said, to how the compliance consultant avoided her eyes, to how Lucas avoided her entirely now, his charm reserved for people who could never threaten him. Distance had replaced familiarity, and distance told the truth more clearly than words. One afternoon, a junior staff member whispered that auditors might be looking at something older. Ruth didn't let hope rise. Hope was dangerous. But awareness settled in its place. Lucas, meanwhile, leaned into his relief. He framed the audit as routine noise, at lunches downtown, laughing with investors who never asked who absorbed the risk. When a major board approval came through tied to a foundation partnership, he smiled and forwarded the email to his father. Looks like it worked out. What Lucas didn't see was the quiet parallel thread unfolding elsewhere. An automated integrity scan, triggered by the earlier incident, flagged inconsistencies from months before. Small access adjustments, minor changes, individually forgettable, together suspicious. Threaded through them was Ruth's name, appearing repeatedly where decisions had been made without her authorization. A human reviewer paused. Ruth's role, access level, and compensation didn't fit the pattern of manipulation. The system recorded her presence, but not her benefit. That contradiction mattered. The anomaly was escalated, not to Harrison, but to an independent oversight channel. The note was brief, repeated use of staff credentials in executive-related adjustments. Possible misuse of delegated trust. Elaine messaged Ruth that night. They're looking at timelines now, not just people. Ruth felt the weight ease, not because she was safe, but because she was finally visible. At the estate, Harrison began hearing new questions. Not about staff behavior, about delegation, about authority, about limits. His answers tightened. Lucas noticed the shift only when an unfamiliar meeting appeared on his calendar. Follow, up review, delegated access. Offsite. He forwarded it to his father. Harrison didn't reply right away. That delay unsettled Lucas more than accusation ever had. As Ruth prepared to leave work, her phone buzzed with a request from compliance, additional questions regarding historical access logs. She replied calmly, "I'm available." Privilege had escaped again, but it had left fingerprints behind, and fingerprints had a way of resurfacing. As Lucas prepared for a meeting he assumed would reaffirm his immunity, an expanded review began tracing months of authorized actions back to a single pattern, one that pointed not at Ruth's intentions, but at Lucas's unchecked control, setting a truth in motion that was no longer his to manage. Ruth left the Whitmore estate the way she had lived inside it, quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. There was no announcement and no confrontation. She did not accuse Lucas. She did not demand understanding from Harrison. She did not ask a system built on convenience to suddenly become fair. She simply removed herself. The decision came without drama. Ruth understood something clearly now. Staying was no longer endurance. Staying had become permission. That morning, the house woke as it always did. Lights warmed the corridors. Security routines activated. Staff moved through familiar patterns. From the outside, the estate looked perfect, still resting on systems Ruth had built and maintained for years. She completed her final tasks with care. Schedules were updated. Notes were left where notes were needed, not explanations, just instructions. She did not sabotage. She did not erase. She left the house functional because destruction had never been her language. At 9:12 a.m., Ruth placed her access badge on the staff office desk. She folded her uniform neatly beside it, smoothing the fabric once out of habit. When Tasha whispered, confused and frightened, Ruth answered gently, "I'm done." "Did they fire you?" Tasha asked. "No," Ruth said. And after a pause, "Some places don't deserve explanations." She walked out without looking back. The house didn't react immediately. That was what Lucas underestimated. At first, her absence registered as minor irritation. A meeting started late. A delivery stalled. A scheduling issue escalated because no one rerouted it in time. Lucas complained casually. "Where's Ruth?" She turned in her badge. A staff member said. "She'll be back," Lucas replied. "She always is." By afternoon, Harrison noticed the gaps. When he learned Ruth had resigned without notice, irritation flickered, less about inconvenience and more about defiance. She had not waited to be dismissed. She had chosen to leave. By the next day, the estate felt hollow. Nothing was broken, but nothing flowed. Staff stopped anticipating problems. They waited for instructions that didn't come. Ruth had been the quiet bridge between departments, the interpreter between power and labor. Without her, misunderstandings multiplied. Lucas grew angry. Why is everyone suddenly incompetent? He snapped. No one answered. Because competence had lived in someone he had never learned to value. Across the city, Ruth sat in a small cafe, sunlight warming her hands around an untouched cup of coffee. The world felt louder than the estate, messier but honest. Her phone buzzed. Helene Parker. You did the right thing. Ruth replied, I don't know what comes next. Neither do they, Elaine answered. That's the point. Back at the estate, the expanded review deepened. Without Ruth quietly smoothing records, inconsistencies surfaced. Advisors asked for documentation that had never existed because it had always been handled informally by her. Lucas felt it in small ways. Assistants deferred to compliance instead of him. Partners asked for written confirmation where verbal approval once sufficed. Curiosity replaced deference. This didn't happen before. Lucas complained. Harrison answered calmly. Before, we had someone ensuring it didn't. The words unsettled Lucas. That night, he found Ruth's contact in his phone. He stared at it, then locked the screen. Calling would mean admitting her absence mattered. The system strained. Audits stalled. Questions lingered. Lucas's name surfaced more often, not accusatory yet but curious. Meanwhile, Ruth sat through a follow-up interview, answering calmly, precisely, without bitterness. She told the truth as she had lived it. When she left the building, she felt lighter. Not victorious. Free. Trust had walked away, and without it, the house was beginning to collapse under the weight of its own assumptions. As Lucas realized meetings were no longer protecting him, but circling him, he felt the first true loss of control, not because someone attacked him, but because the person who had silently held everything together was gone, and the truth no longer needed his permission to surface. The truth did not explode, it unfolded. It arrived as documentation, quiet, methodical, and impossible to interrupt once it began. The expanded review Lucas had dismissed as procedural widened its scope without warning. Timelines were compared. Access logs layered. Delegated authority examined not through intention, but through pattern. And patterns, once seen, could not be unseen. In a conference room miles from the Whitmore estate, an independent oversight panel spoke without drama. Screens glowed. Files were cross-checked. No one raised their voice. Repeated reliance on a single staff member's credentials. One analyst noted, without corresponding benefit to that staff member. Another added, and without documented authorization. A third concluded. Lucas Whitmore's name appeared again and again, not as a criminal mastermind, but as something more dangerous, a man who assumed systems would absorb his risk, because they always had. By the time the findings reached Harrison Whitmore, the framing had changed. This was no longer about Ruth Johnson's presence in an office. It was about Lucas's absence of restraint. Harrison read the report in silence. It accused no crime. It documented misuse of trust, of informal authority, of allowing accountability to flow downward, while protection flowed up. This can't be internal, Rachel Larkin said quietly. Managing it ourselves will look like concealment. Harrison closed the folder. And if it goes public, it already is, she replied, just quietly. Lucas was summoned. He entered expecting irritation. He found silence. Harrison stood by the window. Rachel sat with the papers aligned, read, Harrison said. Lucas skimmed, jaw tightening. This is exaggerated, they are documenting. Harrison replied, something you never learned to do. I didn't do anything illegal. Legality isn't the measure, Rachel said. You transferred outcome without transferring protection. Harrison's voice dropped. Do you understand what you did to that woman? She chose to help. You chose her, Harrison said sharply. Because she was safe to sacrifice. Silence settled. You will step back from all foundation roles, Harrison said. Effective immediately. This will ruin me, Lucas protested. No, Harrison replied. This will teach you what you were protected from. Across the city, Ruth Johnson opened an email marked FIS Cowan CLUDD. The language was careful and clear. It acknowledged her cooperation. It stated there was no evidence of misconduct on her part. One line stood out: Ms. Johnson bears no responsibility for the documented misuse of access. Ruth read it twice, not in disbelief, but because truth stated plainly still felt unfamiliar. She closed her laptop and exhaled. There was no triumph, no desire to confront Lucas. Justice, to Ruth, was not spectacle. It was release. The findings spread quietly. Donors paused. Partners reconsidered. Lucas's name circulated with caution, not outrage. That was worse. Meetings slowed. Trust required proof. Indulgence vanished. Weeks later, Lucas sat alone in a restaurant where he once commanded attention, unseen for the first time. He thought of Ruth, not as staff, but as the constant he had taken for granted. He reached for his phone, then stopped. Regret did not restore what had been used. Ruth moved on. She accepted a role with an independent operations firm specializing in compliance coordination. Her experience was valued, not exploited. "You didn't burn anything down," Elaine Parker told her one afternoon. "I never wanted to," Ruth replied. "I just stopped holding it up alone." Months later, Ruth passed the Whitmore estate once, seeing the fragility behind its symmetry. Trust had been the invisible architecture. Once it left, nothing looked solid. Final aftertasty, Lucas would spend years learning to live without the silence that once protected him, while Ruth, steady and unburdened, walked forward into a future where dignity no longer required permission, leaving one quiet truth behind: karma did not forget, and it did not need an audience. If this story made you feel something like the video, so more stories like this can be told. Subscribe if you believe dignity, truth, and silence deserve to be heard. Share this story with someone who understands that loyalty should never be exploited. Comment what moment stayed with you the most. Your voice matters here. Stay connected if you value cinematic stories where justice comes without revenge.